The hidden story of England. England, a name that feels eternal. But what if I told you that this nation almost never existed? Its birth wasn't peaceful, and it wasn't planned. It was forged through betrayal, brutal invasions, and desperate rulers who gambled everything to hold on to power. For centuries, the land we now call England was nothing but a patchwork of warring kingdoms, constantly fighting each other, while foreign armies closed in from every direction. Vikings burned its monasteries, kings were mysteriously murdered, and uneasy alliances could collapse overnight. And yet, out of all this chaos, a single kingdom began to rise, a kingdom that would crush its enemies, survive the storm, and eventually claim the title of England. But the path to unity was far from simple, and it all began the moment the Romans walked away. When the Romans abandoned Britain in the early 400s, the island was left in complete disarray. For centuries, Roman legions had acted as a shield, holding back raiders, enforcing order, and bringing a fragile sense of stability. Without them, the land was suddenly exposed. The Britons, desperate and vulnerable, looked north and saw danger. The Picts and Scots were raiding deeper and deeper into their lands, threatening to wipe out communities. In their desperation, the Britons made a fateful decision. They invited Germanic tribes, the Anglo-Saxons, to help defend them. At first, it seemed like a clever move. The newcomers pushed back the invaders and secured the land. But then, everything turned upside down. Instead of leaving, the Anglo-Saxons stayed. And they didn't just stay, they took control. By the start of the 7th century, the Britons' supposed allies had transformed into conquerors, carving out their own authority. What had started as a desperate attempt at survival ended with betrayal, and that betrayal marked the first step toward what would eventually become England. But this wasn't unity. Far from it. The Anglo-Saxons didn't create one kingdom. They created many. As the Anglo-Saxons cemented their rule, England fractured into a collection of rival powers known as the Heptarchy: Essex, Kent, Sussex, Mercia, East Anglia, Northumbria, and Wessex. Each kingdom had its own rulers, ambitions, and armies. Alliances were fragile, wars frequent, and borders constantly shifting. The land was a chessboard where kings rose and fell in rapid succession. The biggest players, Mercia and Northumbria, often dominated, but no single kingdom could unite them all. England, as we know it, was still just an idea waiting to be born. And while the Anglo-Saxon kings fought amongst themselves, they had no idea that a storm was brewing across the sea, one that would shake their world to its core. The year was 793. On the small island of Lindisfarne, a monastery stood as a beacon of faith and peace. But that year, peace was shattered. Viking raiders stormed the holy site, unleashing a wave of violence so shocking that it sent tremors across all of Europe. For the Anglo-Saxons, it was a nightmare they weren't prepared for. The Vikings were fast, brutal, and relentless, and they weren't just after treasure, they wanted land. By the late 800s, East Anglia had fallen to the invaders, Mercia had collapsed, and Northumbria was seized. In less than a generation, 3 of the great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had been swallowed. Only one remained. one kingdom stood as the last line of defense against Viking domination: Wessex. When King Ethelred of Wessex died, his younger brother Alfred inherited not just a crown, but the survival of an entire people. Alfred faced a brutal choice: pay tribute to the Vikings or risk annihilation. At first, he paid. It bought him time. But Alfred wasn't a man to accept defeat. He reorganized his armies, built fortified towns, and prepared for the day when Wessex would strike back. That moment came at the Battle of Edington. The clash was fierce. Outnumbered and outmatched, Alfred's men fought with everything they had. When the dust settled, the Vikings were broken. Alfred had done the impossible. He had stopped the tide. From that moment, Wessex wasn't just another kingdom. It became the beating heart of resistance. Alfred's victory didn't unite England, but it planted the seed, and soon that seed would grow. With Mercia weakened and leaderless, Alfred made a bold move. Instead of appointing a rival king, he placed a loyal nobleman in charge, one who would answer directly to him. For the first time, two of the great Anglo-Saxon kingdoms stood under a single authority. When Alfred died, his son Edward and his daughter Ethelfled, known as the Lady of the Mercians, continued what he had started. Together, they pushed back against Viking control. Ethelfled, in particular, proved herself a remarkable leader. She expanded Mercian lands, marched north, and even brought the powerful city of York under her influence. In a world dominated by men, her leadership stunned both allies and enemies. But fate was cruel. After her death, Mercia's fragile independence collapsed, and Edward of Wessex seized the opportunity to absorb it entirely. What had once been two kingdoms was now one. England was taking shape, but it still wasn't whole. When Edward died, his son Ethelstan rose to power. Unlike those before him, Ethelstan didn't just want to rule Wessex and Mercia, he wanted to rule everything. Through marriage alliances and bold campaigns, he extended his influence over Northumbria, the last great holdout. By 927, he had achieved what no one before him had managed: the creation of a united English kingdom. Historians often call Ethelstan the first king of England, and in 937 he proved it. That year, a massive alliance of enemies, Constantine of Scotland, Olaf of Dublin, and Owain of Strathclyde, marched to crush him. The two sides met at the legendary Battle of Brunanburh. The fighting was brutal, the losses staggering. But in the end, Ethelstan stood victorious. For the first time, the English felt truly united under one banner. Still, victory didn't mean peace. Ethelstan's death in 939 left a fragile kingdom behind. Almost immediately, the Vikings seized their chance. Olaf of Dublin swooped in, retaking York and carving away pieces of England. Ethelstan's brother Edmund inherited the throne, and while he eventually drove the Vikings back, his reign ended in sudden violence. In 946, Edmund was mysteriously murdered, struck down in his prime. Instability once again gripped England. Rival claimants rose, Norse kings returned, and Northumbria in particular became a battlefield that changed hands again and again. It seemed the dream of a united England might collapse entirely. But then came a king unlike the rest, not remembered for bloodshed, but for peace. When Edgar came to power, England was exhausted. Decades of war, betrayal, and invasions had taken their toll. Edgar recognized that what England needed wasn't more conquest, it was stability. Known as Edgar the Peaceful, he ruled not with constant war, but with reform. He upheld many of the laws and customs from the Danelaw, ensuring that Danish settlers felt included rather than oppressed. He strengthened the church, reorganized governance, and laid down the framework of a kingdom that could endure. For nearly 2 decades, peace, order, and unity defined his reign. Edgar may not have expanded England's borders, but he did something far more important. He gave the kingdom roots. It was under his leadership that England finally began to look like the nation we recognize today. The story of England's birth isn't simple. It's not the tale of a single battle or a single king. It's a saga of betrayal, foreign invasions, unexpected leaders, and blood spilled across centuries. From the Romans abandoning Britain, to the rise of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, to the Viking onslaught that nearly erased them all, England's very existence was never guaranteed. But through the resilience of Wessex, the vision of Aethelstan, and the reforms of Edgar the Peaceful, a fractured land finally became one. England wasn't given. It wasn't inevitable. It was fought for, piece by piece, century after century, until at last, unity held. And from that fragile foundation, one of history's most influential nations would rise.